r/AskReddit. Police officers of Reddit, have you ever had an all units call, and if so, what happened? 25 years ago. Smallish rural town. My dad is a beat cop on patrol. My cat brings in a live mouse and is playing with it in the kitchen, and my mom is deathly afraid of rodents. So she calls dispatch and tells them my dad needs to come home. Dispatch gets on the line and tells my dad to switch to a secured line. There's an emergency at home. My dad's driving home to take care of the issue when all of the cops, probably like 4, of my small town on patrol, come with sirens and lights blazing on my house because all they heard was there was an emergency at my dad's house. My mother was mortified. I work as a police communicator at a local university. Usually an all units call is a fire alarm at one of the buildings. However, most of the time it's a false alarm and someone just burnt the popcorn at the lounge. Obligatory, not a cop. But I once got an all unit call to my house. Backstory. My mom was dating a meth head and everyone knew who he was. And our address. I was around 15 and one night he went off the rails and was beating the shit out of my mom. I got involved just in time to see him swing at my sister, who was 7 at the time. I ran for the phone and called it in. I got as far as the address when he grabbed me by the neck and threw me. Well, the dispatcher heard my garbled yelp and called it in as a possible homicide in progress. That, combined with his reputation, sent every single cop in the surrounding jurisdictions came flying our way. By the end of it, I think there was 20 plus police officers at our house. I ended up hitting him with my mom's cast iron skillet to keep him there just as the first officer showed up. He was super cool about it and pretended he didn't see a thing. It was a terrible night and my mom was mad at me for months. But man, you don't fuck with my little sister. We have calls almost daily that kind of meet this requirement. We have patrol sectors, each with a 2-man cruiser and a 1-man cruiser. The 2-man cars handle the high priority calls and the 1-man cars handle the more mundane stuff. So when a call comes in like shots fired, both sector cars go and usually other sector cars start radioing and that they are also responding. I do remember one night at midnight, which is shift change. We had a 2-man unit that shot a guy who pulled out a gun on them. You could hear gunshots over the radio and the car calling for help. The dispatcher kinda stumbled a bit, then said everybody go. Everybody go. Might not have been an all units call, but the day my daughter went unresponsive after having a febrile seizure, the 911 dispatcher sent out unresponsive 2-year-old and we had about 30 EMT, police, firefighters at our house in minutes. We live in a rural area, short distance from fire hall, ambulance hall, and everyone is a member EMT. Thankfully, she was okay. But it was scary for us at the moment when her temperature wouldn't go down and then she passed out. Was a military police officer on a rather large base. I was getting off shift and being transported back to my barracks by the guys coming on shift so I could check in my weapon. Suddenly we got a call for all units to respond to a section of base housing. A military wife was having an affair with another soldier while her husband was on deployment. Supposedly the husband was due to return soon, so she tried to break it off with the other guy. He responded by stabbing her several times. My team leader and I searched the tree line with our weapons drawn, cause he's armed and it's dark outside, yeah no. I actually passed the guy with my team leader a few yards behind me and suddenly he comes out saying, "You're looking for me." Scared the shit out of me. My team leader covered him while I went in for the handcuffing, making sure that I had my knee firmly planted in between his shoulder blades and thoroughly covering his upper torso into the muddy terrain. Not sure what happened after that. He was taken to a holding cell by another squad and I got to go home. Ended up getting transferred from that base a few months later, but I know the wife survived the wounds. Too many examples. London riots. Unit attacked with a machete. Large group fighting with knives. Building fires. So on and so forth. Happened to my dad when he was stationed overseas. There was an airshow disaster in Germany and he was already there, so he was one of the first to respond. He struggles from it still. Fireworks and barbecues remind him of the smell of burning flesh that day. Not cop, but hopefully relevant. I was at one of the lakefront beaches in Chicago a few summers ago when According to news report later, a party 1/4 mile down the trail started getting out of hand. Apparently party got way overcrowded, so a pair of cops rolled up in a squad car to get the mariachi band to quit, in hopes of folks losing interest and dispersing. This was a no-go and crowd responded by, among other things, breaking the squad car windows and surging in around the cops, one of whom put out an "oh shit" call. I don't know the details, but apparently Chicago cops have a code that basically means drop whatever you're doing and get the fuck over here, because within 90 seconds Wilson Ave looked, I shit you not, like that epic car chase at the end of the Blues Brothers. If I had to guess, must have been at least 50 cars hauling ass down onto the lakefront, one after the other, like a high-speed parade of cop cars celebrating "we're gonna fuck you up then arrest everybody" day. Which, basically, it was. My dad was a PAPD officer for 30 years. 2 times he had all units calls. First was the 1993 WTC bombing. The second was the 9th of November 2001. If he didn't pass away from an illness related to his time at the WTC site and 01, he'd be able to convey his impressions of that day better than I could. I recently found his handwritten notes from that night. They were jumbled together on his notepad in placemats from a diner in the area. Edit. Whoever gilded my comment. Thank you. Not a cop but former practicing journalist. Current PR person. Got a text about a shooting. Turned out a cop made a stop. Got shot in the neck by the passenger. Killed the passenger and shot the driver. Driver got away. Cops from the 2 adjoining cities came. Sheriff's deputies, airport police, and university police all came out in under 3 minutes. About 150 cops. Within 30 minutes. Marshals, FBI, and ATF were there as well. Largest response I've ever seen. There were rounds that had been fired into the buildings surrounding the area. It was a mess. I was in the wrong place at the right time, I guess. Last story I ever did. Made the full-time switch to PR. Edit. The cop survived. Years ago. Friend of mine was a dispatcher for the county he covered, sheriff, EMS and fire communications, and also worked with communicating with other agencies as well. From the state troopers, he got some sort of text communication, not a phone text as was before that was a thing, and it referred to an accident with injuries at the intersection of I-40 and Business 85. Something along the lines of collision I-40 bus 85 injuries involved. The way it was abbreviated and written made him misread it. Instead of an accident at 85 Business, he thought there was a bus collision on I-40, with 85 people injured. He dispatched every damn fire truck and ambulance the county had. They show up and it's a 2-car wreck with minor injuries. Edit. Wasn't actually I-40. But I can't remember which highway it was, somewhere in Davidson. I know the bus 85 part is right though. My father was a highway federal officer, Federal de Caminos. Rough translation, here in Mexico. They were armed with light machine guns of standard caliber because shit goes real against the cartels here in the northern border. But it's so big and spaced out you have to deal with it yourself cause the nearest unit can be 1+ hour away and they have reinforced trucks. Anyway, he once told me that he encountered a convoy of 3 Humvees while he was on the side of the road relatively hidden. He opened fire at the first Humvee's tires and it loses control. The other 2 brake and like 12 dudes with Kalashnikovs come out to fire in random directions. They probably didn't saw where they got shot from, and my father lays down suppressing fire on them until 2 units come from each side of the road from a relatively nearby station to arrest what's left of them. Never a policeman, but I used to work in the security industry. I was quite well known by the local officers and had quite a few dealings with them, both in and out of work. One day I got a call on my mobile phone while on duty. Bit odd. It was the local custody sergeant. Apparently there had been a call that a child was being attacked in some woodland next to my site. I was being asked to run to the site of the report as I would be there first. A good 2 or 3 minutes in front of the police. I went, and pretty soon was scouring this little woods for anyone I could find. The whole time shitting myself. What if I find someone doing something to a kid? What do I do? I probably shouldn't kill him. Could I not? Could I just frighten him off the kid and take control there? Would I be able to control my anger? All those thoughts happened in a flash. Plus more. I did a few frantic laps of this place before hearing cars pulling up behind me. Outside the wood. Next thing there was the entire local police force and there with me. We never found anyone. No sign. Horrible moment. Buddy's first day on the phone at a fire station in an international airport. Airliner detects a fire in the rear by the generator. They are coming in hot and need assistance immediately. Buddy decides a major airliner incident is imminent. Calls the city fire department, which might have 80 fire stations. They all send every unit, expecting complete mayhem. Airplane lands safely. False alarm. 200 fire trucks are lined up for miles outside the airport. No one was able to get in because the gate was closed. My rookie friend botched his all units call. Edit. It was a false alarm. Not sure if that's clear. One that stands out was a chase which ended with a crash. 3 dead people and a trunk full of guns and drugs, but there's robberies. Pursuit assists. And man with gun calls, all of which usually get opened up depending on the situation. And always. Officer down. Or needs immediate assistance, 10-24. If you're close especially. They hit that button or shots start going off, I'm dropping everything. Grabbing my 416 and traveling light speed and coming in with everything I got. A friend of mine was a K9 cop with a local small police department. He was a solid guy but, by his own admission, wasn't the brightest. As an example, he couldn't learn the German commands for the dog, so they had to teach the dog English. Anyway, one day an all call or whatever it's called came in. It was regarding a shooting, which is rare here. My friend was taking a dump at the time and his dog was in his SUV K9 mobile. The cops went running out and jumped in whatever car was available. The K9 was in the back seat. When some other cop jumped in the SUV, the K9 got spooked and clamped down on the cop's neck. He freaked out and started screaming into his radio. All the other cops thought he'd arrived at the scene and been shot. My friend, hearing on the radio and knowing how his dog acts, ran out of the bathroom pulling his pants up. Havoc ensued. If I were a cop, I'd want to work for a small police department. Not a police officer, but I had an incident where 20 police cars were in my neighborhood the day my mom passed away. They wouldn't let us see her until after the autopsy came back and she had a heart attack. My entire house was filled and it was a decent sized house. One was sitting in my gaming chair looking through things. Like, dude, you're not gonna find anything on a 14-year-old girl's desk. It was around 9 AM when I found her, and by the time they all left it was close to 11 PM. TLDR, my mom died and police stayed for almost 14 hours. I served in West Belfast, Northern Ireland. Due to the high threat level in my division, we would patrol in 2 armored Land Rovers, each with minimum 3 armed officers, one of which would have an assault rifle or SMG. Basically we could handle most scenarios. One day, however, our vehicle was in an intentional head-on collision with a stolen car. As it was driving towards local children playing in the street, this resulted in our front wheel arch bending to the point the vehicle could travel no more. In a few minutes, the community we were there to protect turned against us. It was like Black Hawk Down. A few hundred people came out of the woodwork when they realized we were an easy target. Petrol bombs and bricks rained on top of us as we attempted to pursue the car thief on foot. We jumped in the back of our vehicle and called for assistance. In under 5 minutes, a fleet of approximately 5 to 6 armored Land Rovers appeared from the neighboring division and drove the crowd back. They managed to tow us to safety and we lived to get bricked another day. There was a high-speed chase and the officer overcorrected a turn and crashed into a light pole and median barrier. His car caught on fire. Between the light pole, barrier, and his own car, he was pinned inside and nobody could get him out because of the fire. So all units had to watch him burn and scream. By time they got a fire truck out and put out the fire and untangled him, he was dead. That was one of my dad's best friends and was the first time I saw my dad cry out of sadness. Yup. Lava erupted from a fissure in a subdivision in Puna on the Big Island in Hawaii. Interesting day. Not a police officer, but used to work corrections. An inmate decided to try and fight one of our newer guards. The inmate failed to realize he was a military policeman trained in hand-to-hand combat and just a good fighter. Lol, we watched it on the cameras quite a few times after. I am not a police officer, but I watched this happen. Our local school has a spring festival that's a big fundraiser for us. The local police have been extremely supportive and always send out a VW bug painted in police colors. The officer they send is great with kids and an excellent ambassador for the force. So, bright sunny spring day. Kids milling around. Carnival atmosphere. I'm walking with my friends. One eye on my kids. My friends have their non-verbal autistic son close by. Since it's a lot of stimulus. He loves the police car. Sirens. Lights. It's awesome. Officer McFriendly crouches down to eye level as the boy is sitting in the car. The boy turns to him and offers a high five, landing his hand on the officer's radio. More precisely, on the officer down panic button. Like the doleful eye of Sauron. Every cop in range turns to converge on the schoolyard. The officer realizes what's happening and manages to wave off the imminent hot takedown of a preschooler. But I must say there was genuine fear in his eyes. Not a police officer but dispatcher. Officers were doing a vehicle stop. Vehicle suddenly took off, nearly running over an officer. Then the vehicle crashed, flipped over, and one of the suspects took off on foot. Units started dialing over from all over the city to set up a perimeter and catch the suspect. My shift ended but they got him. Yes. Whenever another cop calls for help on the radio, you drop whatever you're doing and blast your ass to their location. Not a police officer but the person all units were focused on. My high school had an open campus. So some friends and I were at one of their houses a few blocks away for lunch one day. We were messing with an airsoft gun in his backyard. And some neighbor saw it and called the police thinking it was a real gun. We were ordered out of the house with a megaphone and swarmed by the SWAT team once we were all out. I'm talking 15 officers with full armor and assault weapons. Once I was on the ground, I looked around and saw 4 or 5 police cars parked across the street with snipers focused on us. We didn't end up getting in any trouble because we didn't actually do anything wrong. But I think the response was justified based on the call and the concern over school shootings. Here is the archived newspaper article on the incident. Edit. Full article for those that questioned the legitimacy. 3 years ago my sergeant was shot and killed attempting to talk a child molester probation violation warrant suspect out of his house. Guy shot him directly in the forehead through a window at an angle they didn't believe was possible, hence the fact he was standing at a window. I had been pepper sprayed that morning at a less than lethal instructor course and while driving home from a neighboring town I saw dozens of emergency vehicles flying through town. I responded as well because nobody was answering the radio and was met at a perimeter by another agency in our jurisdiction. The guy was my friend and told me what had happened. Headed to the hospital after that. Halfway there I stopped to call my family so they wouldn't think the mental health officer killed was me and completely lost it. After regaining composure I got to the ER and met with the rest of our unit and sergeant's wife. Hearing her scream standing over his dead body haunts me to this day. Guy gave up. My sergeant's wife didn't want to go through a multi-year ordeal and within 6 months the pose had signed a plea deal for life without parole as long as death penalty was taken off the table. UK. 2010. Weatherspoons on a crossroad on the main road out of the city. Local football derby match just finished in pub. Chatting with friends across from the pub. Suddenly, 2-3 police vans or cars from each of the 4 directions come steaming up, blue lights and sirens, 10-12 vehicles altogether. Big guy confronting male and female officers out front. Suddenly goes stiff and hits the deck, cuffed and hauled away, hit with a taser gun. 5 minutes later they're all winding down and leaving when police officer turns up panting on his push bike, had clearly biked a couple miles to respond. Huge round of applause as he arrives. TLDR, police officer is beaten to the scene by 10-12 other units but still busts a gut to get there. Better late than never, proper dedication to helping out colleagues. Edit. I'm not in the police but witness the emergency response button being pressed. I have a buddy who's high up in the local PD. One day, when we were having an abnormally high amount of snow, like a foot high for our area, he got a call about an elderly lady with dementia gone missing. He went over there and apparently she had gone out in the snow with no coat and had been missing for almost an hour. He called in all active units. K9. Anyone in the area. Even got the helicopter up in the air. Well, the helicopter has a thermal camera and found the lady in like 5 minutes, so all these cops show up for no reason. She was fine. He loves that story. Remember a few years ago those bank robbers in full body armor who just walked around shooting up cops and turning their cars into Swiss cheese? Cop says to dispatch, "Officer down." Then another. "Officer down," then another, and dispatch says, "We got that," but cop says multiple officers down. It was chilling. I'm sure a Reddit sleuth could find it. I'm not a police officer, but last week there was a big standoff in the town over from me. A man held his wife hostage for a few days. I'm unsure of the backstory, but I believe the relationship was ending. When SWAT arrived, the home exploded when they tried to enter and 6 officers were injured, so they ended up calling officers from other surrounding towns. It was all over the news and you could see SWAT and POs everywhere. The man had a lot of smaller sheds in the backyard and everything started to catch fire. I believe the woman got out, but they found the man's charred body inside once they got the fire under control. Not a cop, but my friend is. They had an all units call when there was a shooting at the AB plant here. It was an active shooter situation. I also believe it was an all units call when they had a shooting at Kirkwood City Hall too. I remember I was on my way home from work and saw cop after cop flying by on the HWY. It seemed to be non-stop. Not a cop, but I'm pretty sure I saw one of these situations Saturday. I was sitting in the car with my son eating some ice cream in a gas station parking lot when a cop car went by. Kid of course loved it because the lights and siren are on. A few minutes later we see more going the same direction and one lone car coming from the other way. I'm assuming the lone car was the original one we saw go by, as there were no others that came from that way. Dude is flying and the cars coming the other way stop, so I'm wondering what's going on. Turns out it was a chase with a dark SUV that I didn't see until they were passing us. All the other cop cars turned around in the street right beside me. I saw at least 8 cop cars go by in a span of a few minutes. Best show the kid's ever seen, because I'd never seen anything like this before, so I'm freaking the fuck out and he's seeing all this shit go on right beside him. Learned the next morning that state patrol was eventually involved and performed a pit maneuver on the SUV to make it stop. This is a tiny city. We never see shit like this. Former cop here. The all units call was basically a riot at a large nightclub in a very rough area of the neighboring city. Once things were finally calmed down and the dozen or so people were taken away and my boss wanted us all back in our city, I was amazed at not only how many cops showed up, but from where, counties and towns I had never heard of before. I looked up a few at the end of shift and some came from an hour plus away. A large wedding in Brooklyn. It was on a midnight, so there weren't that many units to begin with. The families started warring with each other, and when we arrived they of course turned on us. Everyone, I mean everyone, was brawling and we felt like Custer at Little Bighorn. We turned out 3 cars that night and one of them was out on a homicide, so we're just yelling, "Keep 'em coming." Central. The duty captain, the supervisory officer for the patrol bureau, shows up, looks around, sees that this is quickly becoming a rout and calls a citywide 10-13. Which means a designated number of cars from every borough task force in the city. That was one of them. I once had all units called on me. I was riding a bicycle at night, and I didn't have a rear light. I actually did, but the battery died between when I left and when I got pulled over. It's happened 3 times that I've been on duty that I can recall. First time was a riot at a local theme park. Some idiot kids put out that there was going to be a fight in the parking lot, and for some reason that meant several hundred high school age kids all gathered in the lot and got into a huge brawl. The first few officers responding got surrounded in the chaos and they put out an officer in trouble. And because of the size of the crowd they asked for officers from all over the county. The others were officer down calls where the gunman was still at large. Former police officer here and not as crazy as other posts here. I was involved in an accident while in pursuit of a vehicle. I was T-boned on the passenger side of my patrol car. It was bad. My car did multiple 360s, jumped the highway median, and finally landed right side up. Every airbag went off. I must have blacked out due to the impact. When I woke up there was blood on the airbags and all over my uniform. I knew I had to call dispatch, but due to a concussion, I wasn't making any sense. All dispatch heard was that I was in an accident, and I think I started mumbling nonsense. With the radio crackling, I heard my dispatcher yell for all units to go to my location. Cars all had GPS units. The car door was stuck and I thought I was never getting out. Thanks to an off-duty firefighter and plenty of other good Samaritans who saw what happened, they were able to pry the door off the hinges. And I swear to you, at that exact moment, at least 20 other officers from many different towns came to my rescue. It was a humbling experience that I'll never forget. There was a 50% off at Dunkin' Donuts. A cop rear-ended my husband at a red light because he was talking to someone out the window. We lived in a small town and I kid you not, every last cop on the force showed up to make fun of him. It was hilarious. I recently had an all available units respond call for an unresponsive child. My partner and I have never driven so fast. When we got there all you could smell was brakes and exhaust fumes from our cruisers. We entered the house and found the child, a 1-year-old boy. We performed CPR. He was transported. He didn't make it. It's hard to be criticized by the media and general public when these are the things we deal with. This is from the opposite point of view, I guess. I was a Marine with a small unit returning from months of overseas deployment in a conflict zone. We had 12 hours on Guam and headed straight to the enlisted club. We got a little wild. Finally the bouncer and manager came over to us and asked to talk to the senior Marine. The senior Marine was a staff sergeant who was almost passed out and was resting his eyes with his head on the table. Head bouncer says, "Staff sergeant, if you can't calm these Marines down, we're calling in the riot squad." You could hear a pin drop in the place. After a long silence, Ernie, the staff sergeant, says, "Wow. That sounds great. Bring him on." This was not the answer they'd hoped for, lol. I can't actually remember too much of what happened after that. I just know I was still drunk when we flew out a few hours later in the back of a C-130. Edit. Corrected a typo. One time my friend and I had a single joint in the car and I kid you not 6 squad cars and a K9 unit showed up. At some point I think their thoroughness was just a desperate attempt to save face. In progress burglary call in a super swanky part of town. Lady walks into her house to a naked man in her kitchen smiling at her. He charged at her and she ran. It was a cardboard cutout of that Jacob dude from Twilight that her roommate left in the kitchen to scare her. It worked. I remember listening to an episode of This American Life where an officer accidentally locked himself in the back of his car when he went to take a nap. He left his radio in the front. So he called dispatch and was like, "Don't make this a big thing. Just send 1 unit to me." And then dispatch proceeded to call out the code for officer down. So then he heard a bunch of cars put on their sirens and raced at him. Not a police officer. But last time I heard of an all units call, it was because of those damned Blues Brothers. There are only 2 units on duty at a time in the town where I live. So all units sounds more like John and Carl, please report too. We used to have a problem nightclub in our jurisdiction. One night there was a rowdy crowd and one of the units called for all units to respond. But in an unusually calm voice. The shift sergeant got on the radio and said, "What's going on unit 212? Silence." Sergeant again. "Hello? Unit 212, what's going on there? Gang activity? Riot? Ritual sacrifice?" After a few seconds of silence unit 212 responded simply with affirmative. So our shift sergeant called dispatch. Apparently North Region is en route to a ritual sacrifice at the Millennium nightclub. Everyone got a good laugh out of it. Not having a serious tag is basically the same as having a trolls PLS tag. Perhaps it would be a good idea to reverse it. Untagged posts being seen as serious and requiring a unserious Tag for joke play posts. All unit calls are more common and less critical than movies would have you believe. What you may be referring to instead is a code swordfish. A memorable one a few years back was during a celebrity night. They were doing this charity event with a couple of famous personalities, amongst which was Helen Mirren. At around 2 AM a code swordfish is sent out and everyone rushes to the event. The scene was a coke-fueled bedlam of apocalyptic proportions. People screeching and tearing at each other's faces. A man biting into a live cat. A pool filled with foam, chlorine and offal. And in the middle of all this was Dame Mirren. She was riding bareback on a fat hairy man, slapping her thighs in excitement and screaming her head off. I never saw so much vigor and ecstasy in a single person. She was making this weird facial thing like a horse blowing raspberries and throwing loud wet farts after each one. We tased her, but she ran butt naked into the street, climbed a palm tree and swung away from tree to tree. We caught her a day later when the coke wore off and she crept into a local chicken farm to sleep. I got run over by someone fleeing the scene of an incident that they weren't involved in. He just got scared and apparently had a gun on him. I was out of my car talking to the person who called and my partner was trying to stop the person who was really called on. So he didn't even see me get hit. No one knew I got hit or where I was because my radio went flying. Luckily there was a lot of witnesses who called 911 and found my radio. I confused the dispatcher because I was in so much shock that I came over radio taking like I normally do. But I was bleeding badly from my head and broke my leg. I didn't feel the pain for about 2 hours. So I had that call come out because of me. I'm also pretty sure a policy got made because of me too. As the story goes in Duluth, MN, for a long time the radio signal that available officers could meet for Dunkin' Donuts was the code word Broken Arrow. One day a non-Jaluthian was in the local newsroom when this was overheard. He got alarmed and told the rest of the newsroom that the code word likely meant that the police station was at that moment overwhelmed and outgunned, and they were calling all available units to help. Reporters rushed to the scene to find donuts. That code word is no longer used. Edit. Spelling. We had an all units call to one of our own stabbed. Everyone went hell for leather to get there, to find one of our guys on the floor with a stab wound to the stomach. We searched everywhere for the suspects and anyone matching descriptions were arrested. So turns out the officer did it to himself. He'd heard you couldn't be fired from work if you were injured in the line of duty. He was under investigation for a minor issue. Not anything involving the public. Just breach of procedure. I don't think I've ever been so disgusted with a colleague in my life. All the other all units calls I've been to have been genuine and luckily my colleagues unhurt. I almost called one myself when someone pulled out a sawn-off shotgun at me. Luckily that panned out okay. Happens all the time. Officer S. in a fight. Possible subject with a gun. Major traffic accident. It's not anything like the movies. If it's a big enough incident, all your available units are going to be going. If you want to get nothing in return, you can like and join my Discord. There is a link in the description.